This session, I was going to thoroughly confuse people with some advanced snippet stuff, and then we'll hand over to Peter, who will do a bit of just reinforce some of the points from yesterday, and then show a few of the macros we've got around to make some of this stuff all a bit easier, to hide you from some of the initial complexities. But yeah, I'll get going on the advanced snippets to start with. Like we said yesterday, we went through the basics, simple snippets, what moderate, advanced, expert, cut and pasting from dialogues, a bit of the basic parameter substitution. But today we'll start to delve into what's necessary when you really want these things to start to sing a bit. Parameters, formulas, yep. Yeah, so one thing that's always clear with this, with all these modifiers now, we're still just providing you with a lot of little tools. The whole thing with V11 is not to be this big prescriptive sort of design system that you must only insert this sort of object. I've really been trying to stick at this little simple tools that do good things for you, and that you can then wrap up in the snippets and have all the functionality in there. Again, there's a basic system that's to be followed. It's like we mentioned the other day, there's modifiers, there are links. They're as they've been for 20 plus years, they're still completely relative. What we're giving you now is extra layers to work with. And yes, it's very important. I'm not pretending that the advanced snippets are easy to learn, nor am I saying they're hard to learn. Again, it's just a case of incrementally learning every step, understanding how the system works, and then solving this stuff is not as hard as it seems. Now, yes, snippets and V11s are basically a collection of fixed modifiers. That's what we talked about on the first day. The fact you've still got the old 12D template with all its parts, cut, fill, decisions, templates, but basically most stuff now is done in that fixed part of the template. If you want to get funky, you can then still go to the old decisions, the old cut, fill part. That all still works, but we've got the fixed part. Now, we went through decisions yesterday. Snippets can contain their own decisions. The important thing is the scope of the decisions is inside the snippet. So you can have a snippet that can do fixed decisions. Are these strings different height? Does a link exist? But it's maintained inside the scope of the snippet itself. It doesn't flow onto the outside modifiers. My brain isn't that big to be able to handle that one, and I think it would only be confusing. Okay. The first thing with the snippet, again, is this parameter substitution. We went through that yesterday, where you define that parameter there, it's called width, and later on you've got that dollar syntax where it simply replaces dollar width with 4.0 if that's what the user entered. But sometimes you want a parameter to be substituted that's not user entered. Now there's a very good reason for this. You want a snippet to work with on the left-hand side of the road or the right-hand side of the road. You don't want the user to have to enter that. You just want the applier to know, well, I'm on the left-hand side of the road, so I want something that'll just do something when it's on the left-hand side of the road. Sometimes you want to put in the name of the send line. I want this snippet to be very portable. I want to run on this road or that road, so I don't want the user to have to say I'm using this as 01. I just want that to happen automatically. Or you want the snippet to use the apply tin. You don't want the user to have to go click a tin box and automatically have the apply tin and enter that. You just want that to happen automatically. So for this in V11, we've got some reserved names that can be used automatically in the snippet. So remember our little syntax for the start and end change, that $_SCH. We've got another one here. If when the snippet is passed, it sees this little $auto LR, it simply replaces that with L if it's on the left-hand side of the road, or R if it's on the right-hand side of the road. Not that complicated. And that's exactly what goes on there. So if your naming convention that you like to use L or R, you can just have, is inserting an edge of pavement. Again, where I mentioned yesterday about those little parentheses, it's because the substitutions in V10 had to have white space. In V10, we have this slightly different syntax wrapped around the parentheses, just so that it doesn't have to be white space delimited. So a simple case here, EP with that $auto-LR just simply translates into those two there. The same thing, we have this parameters reserved, these reserved names that will pick up the name of the sender line. And obviously what this does is it'll just do a straight substitution of the sender line name into your snippet. That, of course, is the same thing. If you want to run that snippet on the curb returns, cul-de-sacs, roads, and keep that unique naming, this is a method of doing it. Again here, we've got the edge of pavement left, and we're saying we want to tag the name of the centreline after it, so it just turns into EPL R23. EPL, yeah, you can see what goes on. Yes, now, again, there's a lot. These can be concatenated, so you start to get this slightly scarier syntax. And all this one here is going, well, I've got an edge of pavement. I want you to automatically substitute L or R, depending on whether left or right, and then the name of the road centreline. Again, once you get used to it, this stuff is not scary. Peter's macro that he shows later on will do a lot of this stuff for you, and then you can have a look at the end result and just get your head around how it works. And of course, in the same thing, if you've got a snippet where you just want to automatically use the apply tin, we have a little parameter called _apply_tin. Same thing, when it encounters this in the snippet, it will just simply substitute there the name of the tin. So if you're using a tin modifier, which you always just want to work with the apply tin, this can be done automatically. Again, this is the same thing about not the user having to pass the minimal amount of parameters into a snippet to make them really, really useful. Okay, yeah, so currently I've got a heap of these automatic ones in use. Oh, my yes, yeah. Those guys, the dollars start chainies, dollars end chainies, the ones we went through yesterday where instead of the modifier start, or name position modifier start, name position modifier end, you could suddenly transform that back into 5 characters. We've got the guys we just discovered, auto LR, or actually there's also auto 05 if you like 0 to 4 on the left-hand side and 5 to 9 on the right-hand side as the Europeans tend to, or the MX style of 0 to H on the left, I to Z on the right. You can use that one there. We've got these guys for pulling out parts of the centreline name and substituting them in the snippet. If your centreline's only got 3 characters, or basically there's a whole name, or you can use the last character or the last 4 characters, or 2 or 3, they're just not there. These are available. We've got these ones I won't even touch here, which are for more complicated stuff. They confuse me, I forget how they work, but they're quite critical for some complex snippets. Again, this auto parameter stuff it's crucial for portability of this stuff. Once you've written it and you've written it well, you'd be surprised where you can use it. Now, things just get more and more powerful. Okay, you've got to act on, when you put a choice box up for the user in the snippet to say, well, what sort of curb would you want to use? Well, in your snippet, you've got to go, sometimes you've got to react on that. If he's going to use this sort of curb, then I do this. If he's going to do that, use this. There's a whole heap of situations where the user's entered something and you need to react on that specifically. Now, everybody's favourite. In V10, we used to use what was called the C preprocessor. The many people who've written snippets in here will know all about it. As a note, you can still use it in V11. Now, why did we use it? When we started snippets in V10, it was the tool that was there. It's been around since the 1970s. It's a method of, anyway, I won't go too much into it. Everyone's used it, they've seen it. The hash defines, the if then, the else's. They proved very difficult for users to understand exactly what they do. I used to get all sorts of things, people would send me stuff like this, say, it doesn't really seem to work. And it's like, as logical as all of that stuff seemed, no guys, none of it worked whatsoever. You thought it was doing something, but in fact it was doing something completely different. And one of the problems with the C preprocessor was, and again, everyone who's used it will know, it's not completely obvious whereabouts in your file the substitutions and all the magic would work. And the other big problem was, as the snippet users will know, we added the ability in that you could create a temporary snippet. So once some processing and substitution had happened, you would get a temporary file. The problem was that at that point, the C preprocess still hadn't been run. That was only run as part of the actual apply process. So you had your total of Mr. Smith there and total equals 4.5. That was still in the file and hadn't been processed. So you really didn't know what happened when the deed was done. So for V11, I got very, very brave and went and wrote our own. So we've written a complete new preprocessor. The big advantage of this one is that by the time you get the temporary MTF file, all of the substitution has been done. And similar to Owen was mentioning the plotting yesterday, if something fails, you're just left with this thing sitting there with $1 in front of it, which MTF will then go, what is this? So it's actually, again, it's a clear indication that something in your logic failed. So without going too much, straight to example. Okay, the guy's entered a curb and gutter. Up the top there, we've got our normal thing. There's a parameter, he's called it K-type, it's the choice box, and it's got an SA curb or a type F or a driveway. We've got this completely new syntax below. It starts with a little @ character, then we've got these various little commands now. And this one says if the value is equal to, in this case, the K-type up the top, which is the parameter, you can see our normal dollar bracket braces substitution equal to SA curb. Now with the C preprocessor, you couldn't do that. The C preprocessor couldn't handle strings, it couldn't handle things with spaces, it didn't understand any of that. This newer version of things does understand it. Again, I'm not going to go too heavily into it. It's a fairly simple syntax and it actually does what you expect. And you can see there's the simple logic. If the value is equal to that, if that's equal to type F, do this, blah, blah, blah. And also note, again, the quotes are still essential in this stuff. If you've got stuff that's delineated with, has a space in it, you need the quotes around it. We have conditional tests in there now. So very simple form, if that value is equal to something, do something, else do something with an end if. Now note, unlike the C preprocessor, I'm not allowing multiple embedded, we're keeping it at a very flat level. It's all you really need to do this stuff, and it just saves all of us from putting a rope around their own neck and just losing the plot of where we're up to. Okay, this new syntax also has lots of other nice things in there. We can do things like this now. If a value is equal and then a double to specify that you're trying to compare doubles, up to there somewhere to define an RL. So they've substituted an RL, and we say if that's equal to 540 within the metre, we're going to do something. So I'm allowing you to do comparisons like if the road width is equal to 3.5 metres, do this. Okay, you can do other things. Again, for people who are experienced with a C preprocessor, they'll get where I'm coming from. If you're completely new to this, I'm sorry, but it's too much to go over. But basically, when we define tokens now, in the old hash define the C preprocessor, it didn't do what you expected. With this guy, we now go, if we're defining a token curb name, and I put those three things together, this stuff is all concatenated together automatically. So down the bottom there, that curb name has suddenly became SA space curb R23, left R23. All that stuff has been concatenated together. Again, this is really an overview to show you what is possible. It's going to be a case of sitting down and working your way through it and understanding how all this goes. Again, I've done all this with the idea of it took a lot of iterations getting through writing some of these more advanced snippets, but once you've got this in place and understand it, you can start to write some very neat snippet code. Now, just a really, sorry Pete, I've got to do it to you once a conference. This one is important, and surprisingly, a couple of people in the conference have already asked me about specific problems I have that they can't solve at the moment. We are now getting into what I'm calling the advanced level, and this is simply about showing you what is now possible with V11 snippets. And again, just remember this is something that you can handle. For people who have these problems, I'm prepared to help out. I'll give examples. And we talked about Peter's little example yesterday about that little barrier problem. We've got a barrier. We want it to run, the one side's always got to be a certain height. The side grades of the barrier are always the same. On the low side, it's got to come at 10% off the existing carriageway and grade up. How can you do that with current modifiers? Well, the simple fact is you can't. With V11, like Peter showed you, you can start to go some workarounds and intersections to do it. But anyway, it gets down to, can it be represented by an equation? Now, the answer there is, if you have a look at that little previous problem, you can work out that mathematically. That's a 10% grade for X distance, and it's got a slope here and the width, set width at the top, and it comes down. If you've got a little bit of high school mathematics, you will be able to pencil down a formula for that. Now, the whole point of what we're going to do next is, if it can be mathematically represented, if you can just go, if these two things are this far apart and this height, then I want to do something to suit, you can do that now. And I'm just going to go through a very fixed example. Again, I'm not going to go into depth here. It's too much to absorb. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm defining some tokens. I'm defining a variable called G0. That's my grade from the lower side there. We saw it 10% coming up. I've got my slope of the barriers. I know they're 13.75 to 1. I've got my width at the top of the barrier. It's always 200 mil. There's a whole fixed thing with that barrier that we know. And the barrier height in this case is always 1.1 on the high side of the road. What happens next? So we've actually, at the snippet level, I've got to be able to get the values of those two links to the road. I've got to know, well, what height was the lower one, what height was the higher one. So there's a new GUI, now a point now here, non-GUI, because this stuff is only available in snippets. It's not available in modifiers, and hence when I was mentioning yesterday, the snippet now is way more powerful than a bunch of individual modifiers. So we have a thing called link variable. And basically here, I declare this link variable. And here I'm pointing to my design, my layer called EXLS. That's my link of the road. That's simply the link name and the layer it's stored in. I just want to store that as EXSOL. And similarly, I've got my asphalt on the other side. I'm just going to store it. So all I'm doing here is referencing by name two links. And it's simply a thing for brevity when you put this later on in the snippet. And yes, I've hidden a few bits more that are necessary in real life, but we'll just keep to the basics here. Now, there's also a new GUI, non-GUI modifier called variable. Now, here you see I'm declaring a variable called V1. Now, you'll notice there I've got that EXSOL with this relative offset and AC with this relative offset. These are little commands that you can use to get the value of these links. What that command is doing there, relative offset, it's just saying what offset is that link from the send line, and it's saying what offset is the other link from the send line. And then I'm subtracting them. And that gives me numbers. It's saying, well, okay, that one's 3.5 metres off, this one's 4 metres off, so suddenly I'm declaring this variable just to be 0.5. And then I'm taking off a few of the other barrier bits and pieces. It's a formula. It's going back from an equation that we worked out to describe this, and I'm storing it away. Again, without going into too much, we can get the width of a link, we can get the heights of links, we can get the offsets, the absolute heights, we can get the coordinates. I can even get the heights of links above a tin and store them. Now, yeah, I was really trying to be gentle with this, but I couldn't work out how to be gentle enough. But anyway, we've got various variables where I declare the variables, I store these values. And then finally down the modifier there, you see the modifier. I'm inserting a new link. It's orange, and it's using the variable, it's using the width of the variable W0, which I've calculated manually. It's using the height of the variable H0, and blah, blah, blah. Now, what I've done there, and I said it's a bit to understand, but basically I've just captured the value of links, I've gone and subtracted them for each other, I've stored them from variables, and finally there's a very simple insert modifier at the end of the day that whatever change that was, it knows exactly where to insert all those points to define that variable height barrier. And that's the guts of this. As long as you know the numbers that you need to. Yeah, I said it's pretty hard. But there's been a lot of people who've had specific problems for me where it's all about, well, what happens if my road's just 4 metres wide and I want to do something special in between? That's what this does for you. It's simply where there's not a specific modifier and all you're interested is in numbers and mathematics, you can do it. So, okay, I wrote myself my own summary probably because I knew I was going to get confused. So yes, as long as you've got an equation describing things, you can capture the values of the links in question, you can declare variables to do mathematics around that stuff, and you just finally use the variable in the modifier. Another quick one, you've just done a lot of work here. Some of this stuff will take you a day, half a day to work out. You don't want to distribute this to the world. In V11, you can compile the snippets. So under design, MTF snippets compile. What that means is anyone can still run your snippet. But at the time, even if they go to use the temporary MTF files, all of the intelligence has been completely stripped out of that snippet. There's nothing left. It is simply a bunch of raw modifier commands. The formulas are reduced in most cases, the fixed decisions, all the other bits and pieces are gone. The new debugging calls we've given you in the snippets do not work when they're compiled. So basically, you've gone to a lot of effort to create some of this stuff. It's just a way to say that if you don't want someone internally to try use something and even just, I'll change this and see what happens, you can compile it. That's it. It's out there. And I think that's all for advanced snippets. As I said, it's actually not difficult to use. It's a case of take a deep breath, give yourself a day to work through and understand the incremental bits that you need to understand. As I said, they are a language on their own right, and I'll hand things over to Peter because, again, we'll have that Q&A afterwards. So if anyone wants me to try clarify that in my normal mumbo-jumbo, I'll do my best. Thanks, guys.